This is a battle between two of the greatest attackers of their time. Rudolf Spielman was actually my favorite player when I was a young boy. His beautiful sacrifices, willingness to take risks, and romantic style inspired me to search out the art in chess. In this game, though, he runs smack into Keres, a powerhouse Estonian grandmaster, who's considered one of the strongest players to never become world champion. One of the problems with imposing your will in a chess game is that a calm, present opponent can turn the energy of the attack against you. e4, e6. Spielman has the white pieces, Keres has the black pieces. This is the French defense. d4, d5. Knight c3, defending that pawn on e4. Knight f6, e5, knight fd7. This is a typical pawn structure in the French. Black has given white a little bit more of a spatial edge in the center, but he's planning on counterattacking with the move c5 to undermine the base of that pawn chain. f4, which is guarding that e-pawn because eventually his d4 pawn will be leaving. c5, going on with the black plan. d takes c5, knight c6. Here white plays a3. There was no reason for black to take back that pawn immediately because there's no way for white to defend it. After knight c6, a3, white's threatening maybe b4, which would lock down that c5 square. So here, bishop takes c5. And here Spielman jumped into the attack with queen g4, eyeing that g7 pawn. Here castling would be a little bit of a mistake, because it's moving right into the line of fire. Keres played the move g6. Obviously the dark squares are somewhat weakened, but it's a solid structure, and who knows, maybe the black king will castle queenside. Knight f3, Keres played a6, calmly preparing b5. Queenside expansion. Bishop d3, b5. Here Spielman saw that Keres might have had the idea of playing b4, opening up the queenside, and then after a takes b4, knight takes b4, bringing the knight into the game, undermining that bishop on d3. He wanted to stop that, so he played the move b4 himself. A fine decision, a little bit aggressive. Now the white king won't be safe on the queen side, so the king's pretty much definitely going to go kingside if he castles. So it makes sense then for bishop a7 to be played, keeping on that g1 square, so the white king is trapped on e1. Now Keres jumped further into the attack with the move h4, threatening h5. Remember that idea, when your opponent makes a pawn move on the king side, usually he'll give you a weakness, a target to go after. g6 has given a target, so h4, h5 is with the idea of opening up that king side using the g6 move. Here, Keres continued with his blockading plan. He played h5, the natural queen e7 move, continuing development. Now black might play bishop b7 and castle queenside if he wants to. Who knows? And now, in this position, the battle really begins. Spielman played the move f5. Aggressive, going right after it. This is the kind of move that a guy like Spielman or Tal will play often. The position is normal, white has a good position, black has a solid position, maybe black's pawn structure is a little bit better. In the long term, black might be able to get an advantage here. So what do? They begin the attack. Remember the principle. What is the space left behind? f5 is a pawn sacrifice. Taking it with the e-pawn would be a mistake, obviously, because it gives up the d5 square. This would be great for white. Taking it with the g-pawn is also a little bit problematic. For one thing, it opens up the white queen coming down to g7. But first, white can play the move bishop takes f5, taking back the material. This is a piece sacrifice based around the idea of e takes f5, knight takes d5. White gives up a piece, but jumps into the aggressive square. Now the black queen has to move. If the queen goes to e6, do you see what white plays? Look for a fork. Very good. Knight c7 check forks the king, queen, and incidentally the rook. But after the king moves, you'll take the queen, and you're winning. If the queen goes back to f8, you also have a fork with knight c7 check. This time you're forking just king and rook, but that's good enough. After you win the rook, you'll be up material. The king is stuck in the middle of the board. For example, after king d8, knight takes a8, moves like bishop g5 check are coming. This king's going to be in a lot of trouble. So after knight d5, black's best move is something like queen d8. But here, the problem is that white can jump into the attack further. Queen g7. And you can see why black's in big trouble. This rook on h8 is hanging. The only move is rook f8, and now white brings another piece into the attack. What do you do with white here? Well done. Bishop to g5. Very strong. And the queen is trapped on d8. The only move for black is f6, and I'm sure you can see that this position is completely winning for white in a number of ways. Just an example, queen g6 check forces the move rook f7, and then you can attack the pinned piece with e6, winning a rook. It's all over. So you can see that if g takes f5, bishop takes f5, Spielman has worked out the tactics. Here, you can't really take back the bishop comfortably, but now you've opened up your king side, and the next move for white will be to move like queen g7. This is uncomfortable. But one thing you can be sure of, if you are playing the black pieces in a position like this and your opponent has played a move like f5, is that he's spent a lot of time, he's had to, calculating out what happens after g takes f5, bishop takes f5. He's been forced to do that because he's really pushing the envelope here. He's made a move which has to be tactically correct in every position. Often when people do that, they'll overlook a quiet, simple move that takes advantage in a more subtle way of the space left behind. Here, the e5 square has been weakened. Keres played the very powerful move, bishop b8. And if I had been playing the white pieces here, after f5, bishop b8, I would immediately know, oh boy, my idea has been refuted. Now I have to hang on. Bishop b8 exposes the weakness of the e5 pawn. Here, Spielman played f takes g6. Now, what do you play with black? Very good. The best move, knight d takes e5. When deciding which knight to capture with in this kind of position, knight c takes or knight d takes, a rule to think about is that you want to keep as many centralized pieces as possible. The knight on c6 is a little bit more centralized, a little bit more active. Knight d takes e5 is the right move. Here, black's threatening a powerful, discovered attack. You see what it is? Yes, if it's black's move, knight takes d3 check, forces the king to move, and bishop takes g3 wins the queen. Here Spielman played g takes f7. His best move would have been queen g5. We'll analyze this later. Instead, g takes f7 was played. White's trying to keep his initiative. After g takes f7 check, queen takes f7, knight g5, threatening the queen. Also, opening up white's defense of the d3 square. So after knight g5, there's no longer a way to win the queen with a discovered attack because the queen can recapture the bishop itself. Here, black has to get out of the attack and continue to mount pressure with a counterattack. Keres played the very strong queen f6. This is a move which functions on a lot of levels. For one thing, it gets out of the attack of the knight. For another thing, it opens up the queen's X-ray attack on this knight on c3. When this knight on e5 moves, queen takes c3 check, forking the rook and the king will be in the air. The other thing it does is very important. It stops white from castling. You see, the white king is stuck on e1. He would love to castle kingside, jump over to h1, be anywhere but the middle of the board. But queen on f6 hits that f1 square. And remember, a king can't castle through check. So queen f6 functions on many levels. A very strong move. Here Spielman played rook f1, acknowledging, okay, I'm not going to be able to castle. I might as well continue with my attack. If you think knight f3 check is the right move, I can't really blame you. It looks very tempting, and it's not at all bad. After knight f3 check, Queen takes f3 though. Queen takes c3 check, king d1. You don't really have too much time to take on a1 because queen f7 check is coming. That's the only problem. This is a difficult tactical move to find. It's black's move. Take your time here, put everything together, see what you can find. Remember, the material is even. So if you win a piece or you win an exchange, you'll be able to convert the advantage. Also, you're looking for counterplay, for attacks. White is threatening rook takes f6. You have a potential discovered attack with your bishop on his queen. But if you take on f3 or on d3, he'll get out of the way with the queen and stop the check. Keres played the very powerful move, knight g4. And suddenly we see that White's position has fallen apart. All of his aggressive moves have created weaknesses, which are going to undermine his game. The knight on c3 is weakened because of the aggressive move b4. The dark squares are wide open. The e-pawn is gone because of his play f5. The quiet move, the calm move, bishop a7 back to b8 is opening up this threat on the queen on g3. The knight on e5 moves out of the way, defending the queen on f6. Of course, the idea of this move centrally is that if rook takes f6, taking the queen, what does black play? Exactly. Bishop takes g3 with check. And now when the king moves, you simply recapture the rook. And what have you gotten out of the exchange? A full rook. Black's up a rook and is winning the game. So you're actually defending your queen indirectly with the move knight g4. Here White's in big trouble. And of course, the other element of the attack is that playing knight g4 not only discovered an attack against the queen, but also opened up a discovered attack against the knight on c3. So the queen on f6 and the bishop on b8 are suddenly slicing into White's position with two discovered attacks. This is very unusual, where one move opens up two different types of discovery. White has to move his queen out of the way. He played queen f3. You see the move for black. Piece of cake now. Queen takes c3 check. The second discovery couldn't be defended. Here he moves the king out of the way. Do you see what would happen after bishop d2? Very good. Queen takes a1. You win a rook with check. King d1. And now you have an option. When you think about this kind of position, it might be tempting to keep on taking material. But here, Keres showed a cool, calm, solid mind. He didn't take the rook. He didn't want to allow queen f7 check. Here, White gets some counterplay. You're already up a piece. You don't need to be up that much material to win a game technically. Here, what you want to do, your only priority in this moment with black, is to stop White's play. Here, Keres brought his most powerful piece back into the defense. Queen g7, completely stopping all of White's potential play. Spielman played queen e2, eyeing the e6 pawn. And now, remember that principle. When you're ahead in material, what do? You trade down. And when you're being attacked, what do? You trade down. In this position, black is ahead in material, he's up a full piece, and White's only hope is in attack, a counterattack. Put those ideas together, black decided to trade off White's remaining attacking piece on that open f-file. He played the move rook f8. He's willing to give up a pawn, maybe, in order to stop all the counterplay. Rook takes f8. King takes f8. White's most dangerous attacking piece is gone. Knight takes e6. He's given up that pawn, but again, remember that whole idea? When your opponent is attacking, you want to trade down, so you give him a pawn to trade down yet another piece. Bishop takes e6, and this also helps alleviate the pressure on black's developmental problem. Black only had one negative thing working against him in this position, which is that his rook on a8 was trapped in by the bishops, which were not developed yet. Bishop takes e6, gets rid of a piece, trades down the knight on g5. Queen takes e6, and now, here, black's up a piece. He plays a principled move again. Keres made the principled decision. Knight f2 check, aiming to trade down again. Here, white played king e1. You see what happens if he plays king e2? Look for a fork. Very good. Knight d4 check, forking the king and the queen. Okay, knight f2 check, king e1. If king e2, you have the fork, knight d4 check. And after king e1, knight takes d3, another principal decision, getting rid of that last attacking piece. And here white resigned. After c takes d3, black has many options. You can play bishop g3 check, start an attack of your own. You can play queen takes a1 if you want to try to get materialistic. But in truth, the most technically correct move would be the simple queen e5. Check, trading down, queen takes, bishop takes. If you're confident in your endgame ability to win up a piece here, which should be very straightforward if you're a good endgame player, no problem. This was a wonderful, clear refutation of an over-aggressive opponent. But remember, there was a position I said we'd return to. Come back to this one. White just played f5. Black played the fantastic move, bishop back to b8. And after f takes g6, knight d takes e5. You've already seen the game. You saw how white tried to continue with the attack, black easily stopped the attack, counterattacked, and won with this gorgeous central onslaught. Now, in this situation, white had a way of controlling the momentum of the game, stopping the downward spiral. He should have played queen g5 here. A simple move, offering a queen trade. White should have played queen g5, cutting his losses. In this situation, if he'd been in control of his psychology, he could have played this move. Now, if a move like f6 comes, then this g6 pawn is very interesting. White can just move his queen away. Black can play knight takes g6, and after bishop takes g6, queen takes g5, bishop takes g5, f takes g6. But now, white's alive. Sure, he's down a pawn, but he hasn't lost the game. If white had made this decision, if he had had presence of mind to admit he made a mistake, f5, when he played f5 it was premature, then he could have gathered himself, gotten it back together, and maybe defended an endgame. This is the kind of thing you have to do. So you think about how Keres turned the psychological tide in this game. Spielman played a very aggressive move. Instead of getting disarmed by it, instead of getting nervous or thrown off by this incredibly aggressive thing coming at him, Keres played the thoughtful, quiet move, bishop back to b8, stopping the attack, preparing a counterattack. That was the moment when Spielman, in turn, should have collected himself, realized, okay, I made a mistake. I'm going to accept the worst endgame, trade queens, stop black's attack, go into a position which maybe I'll be able to defend. Spielman was unable to do that. Clarity of mind is everything. And there is something beautiful about the clarity of mind apparent in Keres' play. If you're a natural counterattacker, this is a fantastic game to use as a beacon in your training. When facing off against someone like Tal or Rudolf Spielman, you know they're going to come at you. They can be intimidating, or it can be turned to your advantage. There's something inherently risky about imposing your will on a chess position. If you violate the position, try to force something out of nothing, then a cool-headed opponent can pick apart your game. We should all be prepared to use adversity.